Grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Are you getting warm yet? No? Actually, my hands aren't too bad now. I think the coffee helped between services. But I hope that you begin to warm up soon and at least that you don't freeze. We don't want to see any of that. So if I see anyone getting up and doing some calisthenics or something like that, we'll know that you're getting on the borderline. But please feel free. Just say amen at the end of it and we'll think you're dancing in the Spirit. I want to talk to you about what was read in the gospel reading, about seeds and, like Phil's been going on about planting seeds and things like that. And what struck me is that it's all about the root going down. The root's got to find a place where it can get its consistent nurture. Because on the other end of it, on the leafy end, which is what we see, but that's what gets buffeted and pecked by birds and eaten with rabbits and things like that. But if the root is healthy and goes right down into the soil, well then you're going to, the plant can bounce back when it's being attacked and things like that. And so I want to talk about sending that root down. The way we do that is with Bible study, with small group ministry. So that's what I want to talk about this morning, is small group ministry, helping you get nurtured further. Is anyone in a small group at the moment? Small home group, Bible study group? Marie is, and she's going to be our guest speaker today, our subject matter expert on the topic, because hers is particularly interesting. But more about that later. So, what we don't. Anyone been in a small group? Okay, all right, yes. So maybe not necessarily now, but have been. So I'm going to be preaching to the converted today, which is always good fun, which is usually what you do anyway, isn't it? So, but small groups are particularly useful for a number of reasons. But just backing up to the, not just the need for it, but also the validity of small groups. I think it's particularly important that our church experience is not just big church, right? I like to separate it into big church and small church, and you need both, right? You have the big church where you gather together on a Sunday morning and you worship God. You celebrate, you hear the Word of God preached, you sing some songs, you fellowship together as one body. That's really good and that's really important. A lot of people in persecuted communities miss that, because they can't, it's illegal for them to gather together as a big group, and so they miss that. But it's really good for the church to gather together in the big group. But you also need that small group experience. It's vitally important because there's a number of things that we can't do in a large group that you can do in a small group. Conversely, there are things that you can do in a big group and as a big group that you can't do in a small group. Both are necessary. See, sometimes you'll get people say, well, we need to get away from the big church model because, that's just corporate Christianity. Constantine invented that, in the 300s. And so we've got to get away from that. We've got to get back to the New Testament model of Christianity, which was people meeting in their homes. That too is an imbalance. Yes, they met in homes. Some of the homes they met in were big enough to cater for a large group of people, 50 or 60 people, that kind of thing. So many at some point that one guy fell out the window of the second story and had to be revived, quite miraculously. But and then Paul still kept preaching, but preached him to death. But anyway, so sometimes people would meet in large groups, but they met in both forms, large groups and small groups. See, if I read you this from Acts chapter 2, you probably know Acts chapter 2, 42, they gathered together, right? They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, the breaking of bread and prayer. This is a picture, it's like a snapshot of early Christianity. Very rare. We don't get a lot of that in Scripture. We don't have much of a look at the first thing, but that's why Acts is so important, because it gives us a good look at the early church. Reading on. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. So more of a snapshot. And then this is the verse I want to focus on, because it gives you a picture of the groups, the two different ways they met. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. Big church. They continued to meet together in the temple courts. The temple courts was a bigger area than this. They had shelters around the sides, but it was quite a large open area, almost like a stadium. They met together in the temple courts. So probably Peter up the front, maybe one teacher, teaching everybody about what Jesus did and what has happened and how it matches up with the Old Testament scriptures. Right? So, teaching. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Small church. They gathered together in the temple courts. Big church. And then they met together in their homes. Small church. You see what happened? They'd come together, big teaching time, and then they'd go off in their small groups. They'd talk about it, they'd discuss it, they'd share it with one another, they'd share with one another, they'd eat together. So eating together, shows it's a smaller group. It's in somebody's home. Homes weren't generally that big. So big church, small church. It's not only here either. In other parts of Acts and throughout the scriptures, we see examples of in other places where they met in either in people's homes, but more often than not they'd go to the synagogue. So Paul would go somewhere and he'd go to the synagogue. He'd find a gathering of Jewish people where they gathered together on the Sabbath in the synagogue, and he'd go and teach there. And sometimes whole synagogues were converted to Christianity. They just continued on as a synagogue, but preaching Christ and preaching the gospel. And so they would have this synagogue gathering already, big church, ready-made, converted to Christ, ticking along nicely, but they would gather then in homes around that. It's always been the case in the Christian church that right from the word go, it was big church, little church. And both of those things came into play to mean the spread of Christianity. Sometimes you would get in one town, you'd just get small church expression, gathering in people's homes, until it got big enough to have the big church expression, which usually happened in about 4 days, early Christianity, the way it just grew. So we have tended to drift away from that model because big church has just been the way that it happened in our society until recent years. In the last 50 years, there's been a bit of a small church revival where they've started to talk about home groups or cell groups, and they started giving them fancy names like life groups or connect groups, or anyone got another name for it? I always grew up with home groups, but then there's a Bible study group, but then people started coming up with nifty names, which is great. Well, now I'd like to call on Marie if she would like to come and share with us her experience or her small group experience.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Hello, is that better? Yes, I'm a member of a home group, and it doesn't involve anyone in this congregation, no one from Peace, and no one that lives nearby. In fact, no one in Queensland. I'm involved with my home group in Sydney, believe it or not. So back in 2018, we moved to Sydney, and my husband and I attended the local Lutheran church there. We went to Epping, it's called Lifeway, and we'd been there a few weeks, and they asked us if we wanted to join a home group, and James said yes, because he was just a normal member of the congregation there. Instead of being up the front like Pastor Rob all the time, he could sit next to me in the congregation, which was really nice. And he was happy to be involved with a home group so he could get to know some people in the congregation a bit better. And we'd meet, I think it was every fortnight in somebody's homes, and we'd have a bit of a Bible study and just a general catch-up, social chit-chat, find out what everyone's up to, and we'd have a prayer at the end. And then, as you know, my life changed dramatically towards the end of the year, and I had to pack up the house, and I needed help. And people from church, and they ended up being a lot from my home group. They came and helped me sort out the garage. I didn't know half the things that were in the garage, and they helped me organise a garage scale and helped me with some of the technology things, what's this, and some things I could sell. And yeah, so it was such an upheaval, and I was so glad to have my home group there to help me. And then I moved away, and I thought, well, that's the end of that home group. But then in 2020, COVID happened, and we all got savvy with technology, and we learnt how to do video chats. And my home group in Sydney, well, they got together and decided to have Skype because of all the restrictions. And then they thought, hey, we could invite Marie back again. So they invited me, and I said, yeah. So since 2020, we've been having home group meetings usually every fortnight, and we have a break over Christmas and New Year. And it's just really nice to get together with them. And we haven't been having Bible studies on Skype, really. We just have a chit-chat and get together and just catch up with everyone and share some personal stuff, especially if we have some sort of illness that's worrying us. And it's just really nice to be able to share those things with people that you trust. And then we have a prayer at the end. And so I've really appreciated that. And one of our members lost her husband a few months ago, and I thought, oh, it'd be really good. It's probably time for me to go back and see them in Sydney. So as you know, over the school holidays, some of you know, I went back to Sydney to see them and to see my friend Ruth, and maybe I hope I was able to help her a little bit as she's going through this time without her husband. So the home groups, I think, are a really good way of sharing God's love around, and people can help you out. You can help them, and they can help you, and it's an expression of God's love. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, that's a good summary good picture. Gives us a real snapshot of what a home group is and what it can achieve. And that's really what I want to look at, because it really is a way for us to grow and for the church to grow. So, my goal is for the church to grow. I don't know. Have you picked that up? My goal is for our church to grow. I would like to fill this church up. Having 50 people sitting here is great, but wouldn't it be good to have 450 people? A lot of people say, oh, it shouldn't be about numbers, but every number has a name. We're not just numbers. Each one of those 450 has a name, and they have a place in God's heart, and he wants them to be close to them. And with home groups, they can have a place in our own heart. We grow together more in home groups, more and more closely than just the meeting on a Sunday morning only. You know, the coffee afterwards is great. That's great. That's a good fellowship time. But you also need that time where you get further into the Word and things like that. I'll just check my notes so that I keep on track, because there are 5 things that I want to talk about the advantages of home groups. The first one is that we need someone to share our most important subject with. Now, are any of you here interested in 1960 Chryslers? No, not particularly interested. Okay, well I am, and I find it's really nice to have someone to talk to about old Chryslers. It really is. Now, God has blessed me with a neighbour who is a Mopar freak, right? He's got a container full of, Chrysler 318s and what is it, 770 transmissions and things like that. He's got a Barracuda sitting there. He's got an old Valiant and things like that. And some of you are saying, what on earth are you talking about? But it's good to be able to talk with him about it. And we'll sometimes be chatting there for half an hour or so about what some people say is nothing, but it's actually important to us. And you just get a lot out of it. It's just exciting. It's not a matter of learning things. You know, do you know the compression ratio of a 318 Chrysler engine? Well, nobody cares right now unless you've got low compression. But it's not about statistics and facts and things like that. It's just about talking about where you're at with your restoration and, you know, how much rust you've got in your door. It's like you need someone to talk to about that. Joy's just not interested. And so it's good to have a neighbour who will talk about that. And so isn't it good when you've got someone that you can talk with about your favourite subject in the world, who is Jesus? You need someone to be able to talk with about Jesus who gets you, someone who gets your interest, someone who understands that, you know, you don't need to teach each other anything right now. You just need someone to talk with about it, because generally out there in the world you can't. You know, you've got to keep it to yourself and keep it under your hat or, you know, in your heart. And maybe sometimes you get an opportunity to bring something out, but you can't dump it all on them. You know, you can't just go all out and talk with Jesus about to everybody. You know, sometimes you can say, oh, look, I understand what you're going through and I want to pray for you, you know. Sometimes you can say, well, look, as you get to know Jesus, you know, you find a reason to rejoice in your life. Sometimes you can say little things like that, but you can't talk about everything. And so you go through the life in the habit of keeping it quiet. And that's not good for us. That creates rocky soil. It attracts the birds. It puts us among the weeds. And so we just need someone we can talk to so that our roots can grow deeper. Home groups gives us that. It gives us freedom. It gives us that free range where we can just sit down, talk about Jesus, practice it a bit, and get comfortable with people. These are things that I don't have to feel uncomfortable. That very feeling of not having to feel uncomfortable may make you uncomfortable for a little while because we're just not used to it. So home groups gives us that opportunity to talk about our favourite subject. And it's also an opportunity to talk with someone else at a level that we don't get the opportunity to just on a normal Sunday morning. You know, we can't ask questions or sometimes some people do, but we can't all get our questions answered. We can't all sit and discuss one particular topic at a deeper level because we just don't have time on a Sunday morning and we don't have the capacity. But you can in a small group. You can sit down and say, today we're going to talk about this particular topic. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more and ask some questions and talk more about it, so that we can understand this a little bit more. We're going to come to a deeper experience of God's grace, just exactly what it means. We're going to sort through what forgiveness means and how it relates to my life. And we've got the opportunity to ask questions and just talk about that a little bit further. And then there's growing in our relationships. We develop friendships that we don't normally develop. Yes, we can say we're all friends because we all go to the same church, but we don't know when each other's hurting. We don't know what our deepest needs are. Like Marie was saying, that's not a long history with these people that she's talking about. But these people that she was with for 12 months, that's all we're talking about. In a 12-month period, she developed relationships that bridge this distance between them and now, and which supported her through hard times, and she can support other people through hard times. In just a relatively short period of time, you've developed that depth of relationship, that strength of friendship. You can do that in small groups, and it really grows much deeper than what you can achieve or what you can experience just with a Sunday morning gathering. It's a fantastic opportunity, and who doesn't want more friends? Now, fourth point, particularly important. We need a place where new people can grow. Right? Church can be pretty daunting for somebody new. Right? Coming from outside, not having an experience to church, coming in here. Now, you probably haven't experienced that. I mean, a lot of church people, like I've never been outside the church. I have, went out there the other day. But, I've never been out. And so I don't know what it's like to get in. But what I do know, what I have heard from people, is that it's pretty scary. Like you come here and there's all these seats lined up, right? That's strange for a start. And there's no tables. Well, there are there now, but, and what do you do? All these people sit there and they stand up and they sit down and they do other things and they sing all these songs that I don't know. It can be really daunting for somebody. And so sometimes that just clouds over the information. They don't receive anything because they're too busy panicking that they're going to do something wrong. A small group is like a halfway point between outside and in the church. And so it's like a safe place where you can meet together with a small group of reasonably friendly people and talk about Christian things and get the hang of this thing that they call faith. And you begin to understand, and you begin to understand that this Jesus is for you, and just how the gospel works, how the cross works, how forgiveness works, how grace works. You begin to understand all of these things so that then when you do come to church, you're not so scared. And also, because there's 3 or 4 people sitting next to you that you know, and also you're there ready to celebrate this grace of God that you've discovered. So you can see it's an essential part of this halfway point. It's where you can grow. It's where you can ask your little questions that you thought were too stupid to ask. And you ask it and everyone says, oh, I was thinking exactly the same thing. So really important little safe place where people can grow. And the 5th one, a place for mutual care. This is the place where you have friends, you've grown as friends, and so when something goes wrong, you're there for each other and you know. So, join a small group. What does that look like? I don't know. What do you want it to look like? It can be a gathering of people where you ride your motorbikes to Esk and have a coffee there and then sit there and have a Bible study. It can be gathering together at Pastor Rob's house and rubbing back his 1960 Chrysler. All welcome. It can be gathering in an afternoon. Maybe there are a group of people who don't want to get out at night, and so you gather together in an afternoon and you have a cup of tea and a cake competition, and sit there, talk about the Word, go through a bit of a study. And maybe you don't know what study to do, and so you knock on Pastor Rob's door and he says, I've got a choice of half a dozen different Bible studies ready to go, and so here, try this one. And so, you can just read through ready-made Bible study. Or, it might be the standard one that I've come to know, I suppose, is you get together one night a fortnight, you have tea together, each one brings a tea. You have dinner together. Got to be careful. Country people, you understand what I mean by having tea together. I'm not saying that you get a range of, English breakfast and Earl Grey. No, tea is like the evening meal. We went to a home group one night. Everyone brought their stuff, pot of food. And Joy cooked up a nice tuna mornay, as did everybody else. So this one night, for a Lutheran gathering, certainly in South Australia, if you went along, there would always be a tuna mornay. Someone would bring a tuna mornay. Well, this time, everybody did. It was actually quite good because no two tuna mornays, there were about 7, no two were alike. They were all quite different, which was great. I didn't find anything problem with that. Of course, all the ladies were mortified. We never had another tuna mornay in our entire history with that group. So anyway, things like that can happen. How am I going? Have I sold you the idea yet? Do you want to be a part of a small group? See, this is the way God builds the church. This is probably the chief way that God builds the church. Did you know that if you're in a declining church, if your church is reducing in numbers, if you're looking at the trajectory of your church and you started off here and you look over 20 years, you're down here, if that's the case, I can pretty much guarantee you don't have home groups. Right? If your church is going like this, on the other hand, started off 20 years ago down here and is now up here, I can guarantee that you have small groups, that there is a strong small group ministry. There is no church on earth which is growing which doesn't have a small group ministry. Do you realise that? Doesn't happen. So so what I'm saying is statistically, while gathering together in small groups doesn't guarantee growth, you won't get growth without it. That's just the way it is. That's what history tells us, and that's what we know to be true. It's the way God does stuff. God is highly relational and wants people to gather together. Is God calling you to begin a small group? See, it won't happen without somebody starting it. So is God calling you to start a small group? Maybe he's calling you to host one, but not necessarily to lead it. Maybe he's calling you to lead it, which scares all sorts of things out of you because you have no idea how to do that. Well, God has a history of using the incompetent and the unqualified for great blessing. So if that's you, then talk to me about it. I can help you with. I have a small group leaders training manual ready to go. We can look at that. Or you can Just gather together with a group of other incompetent people and say, well, let's give this a go and see what happens. And you'll be surprised at what God can do through you and with you. Do you want to give it a go? Is God calling you to give this a go? You know, so often we can get into the habit of hearing God's call and not doing anything with it. And that gets habit forming. And what that does is that it allows fear to rule our Christian walk. Please don't let that happen. Or if that has happened, then end that now. Let's begin a strong small group ministry in this church. I know you need it, but I can tell you that people out there need it as well, because that's their pathway into the church. As you develop into a strong small group, it's pretty easy to bring a new person in. So I'll look forward to working with you to bring home groups to life in this church in Gatton. You know, we may be off to a rocky start. We may fail a few times. We may stumble along, but we'll get it working. It's not that hard. Few tuna mornings down the track, and we're into the Bible, and we're talking together. We're growing together. So I'm willing to help anyone as they begin their walk, as they begin experimenting with this small group ministry. Let's get it to work. God is calling us. God will equip us, and we'll be blessed. So today, as I pray for people, I want to pray for your ministry. So if you feel that maybe you would like to be a part of a small group, or you know, you want to get this happening, then let me pray for you. If everybody comes forward, well, I'll just pray for all of you. But look, I also want to pray individually for you that God speaks to you and can use your gifts and abilities, and will gift you in a way that you need to get this started.